Steven, welcome.
Thanks for having me. How are you? You all right?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for coming. We're going to talk to you about this phrase here that's in the very obvious sign just behind you, never give up. I mean, what motivates you, would you say? So in those moments, what is keeping you going? What's motivating you?
I have to say, with this phrase, never give up, it has to be contextualized in the sense that you don't give up on something because it's hard, right? There is a time when you give up on something, and quitting, as I always say, is the incredibly important thing that you do before you start something better or something else. If you look at my career, I've quit many, many times, but I never give up because something is hard alone. I give up because the hard work is not worth the rewards on offer. So, for example, to kind of make a distinction there, running a marathon to raise money for a great cause, if you get to mile 22 or you hit the wall or whenever that psychological wall is hit, you shouldn't give up just because it's difficult, especially if it's worthwhile. But I do think it's important to give up in situations where it's hard and it's not worthwhile, if you have the privilege to do so. So where does that motivation come from? It comes from exactly what I've said there. It comes from being really anchored to the underlying reason why, the meaningful reward on offer, whatever that might be. So as it relates to my fitness journey, I don't give up when I'm doing, I did a 4.5 hour cycle the other day, and you get 3.5 hours in and you just think, why the hell am I doing this? But you turn on your deep and meaningful, intrinsically crafted why in those situations, which is the really the motivator of all of our lives. And sometimes our why can be quite flippant. It can be quite loose and easily unanchored. So it can be something like, as it relates to fitness, I just want to get a six-pack for summer. Your problem is summer's going to arrive, and then you're going to get a six-pack, and then what? And then your why has become unanchored. But having more sort of deeply, intrinsically meaningful whys, reasons why you're doing what you're doing, allows you to persevere even in the hardest moments. And so whether that's in my business, where there was a lot at stake and there was a lot of rewards on offer, or whether it was in my personal life when it comes to training or other hard tasks, I just have to make sure that the fundamental reason why I decided to start that journey is true, and it is deep, and it is meaningful. And then motivation seems to follow predictably thereafter.
Knowing that never give up is a phrase, it's just as important knowing when to give up, is what you're saying.
100%. And the interesting thing is, part of the reason why I don't give up in difficult situations is because I feel like I'm rewriting my self-story. And I spoke to Chris Eubank about this as well. And I said, you ever have those times when you're on the running machine and no one's looking, no one's watching you, and you could just stop now. Your legs are hurting, whatever. You get cramp in your leg, but you choose to carry on going. And I go, why is that? And he said exactly what I've always felt, which is, it doesn't matter that anybody's watching because I'm watching, and I'm about to rewrite my self-story. I'm about to write the story of who I am in this moment. Am I the type of person, when I get a pain, when things get difficult, that I submit regardless of public consequence or social consequence? Or am I the type of person that will persevere regardless of who's watching? And that's part of the reason why I think I don't give up. However, the other side of the coin is, there are situations where you should give up. And those situations, as I said, are situations where the reward on offer is no longer worthwhile. That's a very subjective thing to determine. And that situation, for whatever reason, is no longer serving you. And then it's smart to give up. It's smart to change lanes, to leave that relationship, to quit that job, and to go in search of an even better situation. Not an easier situation, an even better situation, one that is offering more meaningful returns for the struggle. But that's the thing. I think typically people in life as well, they generally think that struggle is a bad thing. They think that struggle and pain and stress even these are all bad things. But when you look clearly at the science, people that report the highest degree of job satisfaction or are often those that have the most stress in their jobs. They're often people, for example, in the military or highly ranking military commanders. They are often people who are working in the services. And that's because they have very meaningful struggle. Their struggle is helping others, which is a real prerequisite to having a fulfilling life. Struggle that helps others, struggle that is deeply meaningful to you, that is the type of struggle that you should never give up on.
It's really refreshing to hear. It's a completely different take, and I think the audience watching this will be really pleased to hear that. So in terms, we've spoken about what motivates you. I'm keen to find out, who are your role models? So have they always been the same, or have they changed over time? Especially if we look back to in your early years when you're 18, 19 years old. Who are your role models then, and who are they now?
My role models are so interesting because my mother is a role model, and I think sometimes your role models can be for better or for worse, right? You can have a negative role model, someone that teaches you things not to do through their own bad example. My mother was the most hardworking person I've ever met. She would just work unbelievably hard, and I'd never really understood it growing up because I didn't understand why she had to work that hard, but it was just in her DNA. So she was a big role model to me. She would work in her shop all day, then she would sleep on the floor in the back room of the shop, then get up and work in the shop all day. She was never really making any money doing it, so it was more just a part of her character. My later role models in my life have been specifically in more recent times. So it's funny because at different stages in your journey, you adopt different role models to kind of help you see over the next horizon. So at one point I had role models like Jamal Edwards, because he was a young black man in this country who had started a business and who had achieved sort of relative success. And so I looked to him to help me see over the next horizon. And then beyond that horizon, my role models became quite an interesting mix of characters for a very different set of reasons, one of which is Elon Musk and Kanye West. And the reason that these are my role models a lot of the time is actually because of the scope of their ambition and like the level of their ambition, and also the variety of their ambition. So having achieved what I did in my business life, I then started to look to like what's next, and these people gave me inspiration in a way that made me feel that I could do anything, as opposed to doing what I just did. You've got Elon, who started Zip2, then PayPal, and then Tesla, then SpaceX, then Neuralink, which is a crazy company, and then the Boring Company doing tunnels underground, and then others. And this is someone that resisted their labels. They never were confined by their last accomplishment. They didn't become social media CEO next just because they were one in the past, and Kanye's the same. Although I don't agree with a lot of things he says, I seek inspiration from what he did in his story, starting out as a producer and then becoming a rapper and then becoming a designer, then doing a lot of production design stuff, and just how diverse his creative expression has become. So, and then I'm inspired by people that just have really good character and treat people really well. So Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, I'm inspired by their grace and their class, and I hope to emulate both of them in that regard. So I have and then even, I listen to music, and music can become my role model. Books can become my role model, fictional characters can become my role model. So it's interesting because inspiration just comes from everywhere. It comes from seeing the design of something, it comes from hearing, an orchestra, it can come from, hearing a choir, going to the theater. And I think really that at the heart of it is what creativity is as well. I think it's drawing on a very diverse range of points of inspiration to create something new.
You're very much a very big advocate for your fitness. You're very much into your fitness. Would you say there's definitely a link between physical health and mental health do you think that helps keep pushing you further?
I definitely think so. I think the science is pretty conclusive on that point about how exercise is a net positive for your mental well-being. And to be honest, I think anything that brings us back to being a little bit more human and living how we used to live some 10,000 years ago ends up being really positive for our mental well-being. So you've got to ask the question, how did we live some 10,000 years ago? Well, if we needed something, we'd get up and move. We wouldn't use apps or glass screens to tap and have it brought to us. Where would we be moving? We'd be moving out in nature. We'd be out in the trees and on the savannas and with the bees. So that also tends to be incredibly, unsurprisingly great for our mental health. And they've done multiple studies where they have inmates in a prison looking out at a field and trees versus those looking at a brick wall. In depression, there's a 30% difference in the likelihood and the chance of depression just based on what you're looking at. And they've done some interesting studies also in prisons where they just fake it. They have a fake room, which is a nature room, and prisoners that go in there report better mental well-being. So That's also unsurprising to me. And then other things like meaningful connection with your friends. We used to live in tribes, not in four white walls alone in big cities, and that again proves to be significantly better for your mental health. And any meditation's another example where we used to spend a lot of more time, I think, relaxed and in nature, just chilling out without stimulation, without notifications and all these things. So again, taking time to be still proves to be effective to your mental health. So yeah, to answer your question, fitness and being active is definitely a human thing to do. So it has net benefit, sort of human consequences on the mind. So it's definitely promotes good mental health.
If we take that point about mental well-being and obviously notifications in the modern age we live in today, your background was in social media. I know you've spoken a lot and been very vocal in the past about being authentic. If we look at social media, there's an awful lot of false advocates and a lot of false perceptions that people try to be. How important is it to be true to yourself, and what would be your advice to them trying to navigate this at quite an early point in their lives?
Yeah, I think it's increasingly difficult, but increasingly more important, therefore, to be as authentically yourself as you can be. And this is not a new thing. If you go back hundreds of years and you look at what the Swedish philosophers were writing about, one of which I read about in my book, they're very clear in the fact that they said it in different ways back then, but the Swedish philosopher had done some studies and stuff and examined some of his friends, and he concluded that if you try and abandon yourself, so if you try and be someone that you're not, if you try and be other than yourself, and you succeed in doing that, you will end up in despair because you've abandoned your true self. If you try and abandon yourself and you fail, you'll end up in despair because you have failed in abandoning your true self, and you'll despair at that. So his conclusion in this big piece that he wrote about authenticity was that the only way to be truly happy is to be oneself and to not try and abandon oneself. But we live in a digital environment where you're being incentivized to abandon yourself or to be other than yourself, to show certain sides of your life that are probably in the minority of your experience and are probably a distorted, filtered, exaggerated experience. And those are typically the things that will be rewarded for. So the algorithms are clapping for you whenever you exhibit behavior that is abandoning yourself, that is inauthentic. That's typically the way things are. And then you kind of despair at the reality of yourself. If you've created a false perception or a false identity online and you've been rewarded for it and you've cultivated a big audience that are clapping with likes for that false identity, you'll then feel a greater sense of insecurity, and often anxiety isn't too far behind at who you actually are and the reality of who you actually are. And then if you look at other communities, you look at the LGBTQ community and the studies around living a false identity and not being able to express who you truly are and who you love and what you truly believe. You look at the impact that has on mental well-being, and it's astounding and alarming in equal measure. The suicide rates in that community when people are oppressed and not allowed to be fully themselves. So upon reflecting on all of this and thinking about my own experience, it became quite clear to me at some point that lying to the world about who I really am, or having to live up to a false identity, was a form of imprisonment, as is like not being able to speak my mind. These are all forms of like psychological imprisonment that would have the same net consequence on my mental well-being that being in prison does. So, and then I'd say the last point is you end up being a mirror to the world. So the person that I am, that my behavior, the way I speak, will ultimately determine what I attract. So if I am showing up and not living in line with my values, I'm going to attract a bunch of people in situations, in environments, and opportunities that are also not in line with my values. And then I have to live that life. So I see so often when I'm speaking to young people, or even people that are slightly older, they're having these kind of like internal conflicts that resemble a midlife crisis because they've spent 10, 15, 20 years living out an identity that is not in line with who they actually are and where they actually get their fulfillment from. So they get to this like middle age and they're coming to me saying, listen, I've done this profession for 15 years and I did it because I wanted to make my mum and my dad happy. I went to university, I studied this, I got good at it. And then because I was good at it, I got more opportunities to do it. And then all my friends became in this profession. So I can't leave this situation now, because if I leave this situation, I'm going to lose all my friends, and this is my identity and this is who I am. And it's like you've ran too far down the wrong alleyway. Without ever pausing to think, like, is this who I am? Is this my path? And is this where I should be going? And that's quite a hard life to sort of unpick. And it's quite hard to turn back around and go and find out and sort of shed all of that and go and find out who you actually are. Some people go so far down that path that they just don't know who they are after 20 years. And so as soon as you possibly can, it's important to really have maybe, that conversation with yourself and ask yourself who you are. And ultimately, I think I've come to learn that the greatest indicator of like who you are is by tuning into this wonderful device we've all been given, which is called our feelings and how we feel. And that sounds like a very simple thing to say, but it appears to be the case that most people are actually tuned into like social pressure. Like, my mum thinks I should do this. If I do this, I will get a Lamborghini. And then those people that bullied me on the playground will think I'm impressive. Or Instagram will clap more if I go and do this and I get this promotion and I end up working in this job. That seems to be a stronger force than just like, how do I feel in this situation? And actually learning to give up as soon as you possibly can when you feel, when your body tells you that this is not you.
Is it something that you found in your early years when you were younger? I mean, I know you had you dropped out of university, for example.
Yeah.
Is there a parallel to there? Was your journey going to university and what you dealt with when you were younger? Were we on the same lines there? Was it because of that?
I'm here now because I gave up very, very quickly. I gave up faster than anybody I knew. Whenever that feeling inside me said, nope, this ain't it. And so it's funny because I sit here and people will say, oh, you're so courageous. I'm like, no. It's actually, when you think about it deeply, it's actually I'm a coward. Courage would have been to go and live a life that wasn't for me. Courage would have been to go and finish that university course, go and get that 9-to-5 job that I hated. That's bravery. I couldn't do that. So I think everyone that goes and does that, I think that's courage. What I did was, whenever a situation didn't feel good, I stopped doing it. And I still do that now. I stopped going to school, they kicked me out. Then I managed to get myself into university. I went for one lecture, didn't feel good, looked around, this is just school again. Everyone's sleeping on the desk, hungover. No one wants to be here and learn about business. I never went back after that lecture. Started my business, did that for 2.5 years, got to a point where I really just didn't enjoy working with the people I was working with. And also I started to lose belief in the concept, gave up straight away. One night, big glass of champagne, started a new business, which was a pivot of that one called Social Chain. Did that for 7 years. Business was making 600 million. I'm sat there thinking, I don't think I enjoy this anymore. Sent an email, gave up out of the blue 10 days before a major event in our company. And I'm sure I'll continue to do that. And I think that's also why I'm here at a young age. I'm still in my 20s, just about. I think it's because I would not hang around in situations that no longer serve me. And it seems to work. And the other point of that, because it sounds quite simple, is I've never needed to rely on having a backup plan or a plan B. I'm willing to swing off the branch without clarity on which branch I'm going to grab onto next. And most people won't do that. They'd rather choose the misery of their current situation than uncertainty, whereas I'm fine with uncertainty. I think uncertainty is better than certain misery.
It's that constant reassessment of where you are, as I say, because I think a lot of people, myself probably included, that we like the security. We like getting up in the morning knowing that everything's secure. Here's my house, here's my job. It's really interesting to hear that constant reassessment, which a lot of people would probably struggle with, but it's clearly been the making of you.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it is that comfort is really addictive in the short term, but it can really cause tremendous discomfort in the long term. And if you become an easy life person, if you become the type of person that will just kind of get through today in order to get to tomorrow, I'm thinking about my dad, actually. I'm thinking about how, my parents would argue so much, but my dad would do anything just to get through today. So if it meant saying anything or just to get through today, he would do it. What ultimately happens is then you live a more difficult life for the next forever. And so for me, I'm not that romantic and attached to safety and certainty. I'm okay with uncertainty, and I I'm very anchored to the belief that uncertainty is much better than certain misery. Or even like, I just think that I think at some point I realized that I was going to die someday. And that really helped me to have greater clarity on my decisions, because most people think they're going to live forever. If you ask them, they'll say, no, I'm not. I know that people die, but they don't act as such. When you look at how they live, they don't act like they're going to die someday. And I believe that humans don't actually aren't able to comprehend the idea of both something being infinite and it being finite. Like, I think those two concepts are just kind of outside of our mental grasp. And if you really knew that you were going to die someday and that this life was finite, wouldn't you just have like a higher standard for what you're willing to accept, for the relationship you're willing to accept, for the job you're willing to accept? And I remember being sat on a wall at 14 years old looking up at the sky. I think I might have written about this at some point. And I remember just looking down at my neighborhood, and it's kind of like an average neighborhood. Our house was smashed to pieces, but it was an average neighborhood. And I just looking up at this plane flying over my head and thinking, those people are going on holiday. I've never been on holiday. I was like, I wonder if everybody in my street, when they were my age, dreamed of like that life, or were they just happy with this? And so I always think about that, because it was me trying to figure out whether like my family had dreamed of this, or we wanted that, and we just couldn't get it. And I wondered why in my life, if I'm only going to live 80, 90 years, whatever it is, why can't I do that? Why can't I be on the plane? Why can't I go somewhere on holiday? Why can't I live my life to the fullest and experience all that life has to offer? And I just couldn't see any reason why I can't. And so, yeah, I'm not going to be here much longer. 60 years? That's not a huge amount of time. So just trying to just go for it.
So you had a quote there, Stephen, where you said uncertainty is better than certain misery, and I really like that. Would you say, I'm starting to see some parallels with our own sort of origin story that we have at G-Shock, whereas back in the very early 80s, we had a single engineer who worked for Casio. He was gifted a timepiece by his father for his 21st birthday. I believe it was a pocket watch. Running for a train, classic origin story, running for a train, the watch falls on the floor and shattered into a million pieces, and he was heartbroken. Working for Casio, he approached them and said, I've got an idea for a completely shock-resistant timepiece, which can be dropped, entirely water-resistant. And at the time, this was completely unheard of. Watches were very fragile items and perfectly acceptable to break. And he didn't succeed. He spent over 2 years creating over 200 different prototypes, every single one of which failed. And it got to the point where Casio said, look, we've spent an awful lot of time and energy into this project. It hasn't succeeded. We need to give up. We need to wrap it up. And it was only until that moment that our creator sat down in a park, contemplating on nearly 2 years of his life and career being put to waste, that he realised that when you watch a child bounce a ball, that the way the gravity affects the ball, the centre isn't affected. And then he immediately went back up to the laboratory where everything was being packed up. He made one last prototype, and it worked. And he realised that he could actually throw a G-Shock timepiece from a 3-storey building and it would survive. And that's when, in 1983, the G-Shock was born for us. So it's a real, again, we're going back to that phrase, never give up. It's a phrase that's thrown around an awful lot at the moment. But just hearing that story there and your own connection to the brand, would you say there are some parallels there with your own story?
Yeah, I think this is generally the case with all ambitious pursuits where there's a really powerful underlying motivator. In the case of the story you've told me there, you've got an individual whose relationship with his timepiece started out by a lovely gift from someone he loves. It was an expression of love from his father, and that probably formed part of the why ongoing, because that was then broken, which left him with a sort of emotional reaction, which became part of his driving force to solve the problem that he had experienced in the world. And then anytime you set out to solve a problem in the world or create something that doesn't exist, you have a painful, uncertain path to walk in writing a blueprint that's never been written before. And there's no certainty associated with your outcome. There's no certainty because there is no blueprint. There's no guarantee that it'll even work. But the thing that keeps you up, the thing that keeps you in perseverance for many a year, as it did for me, was honestly just having no plan B, because I was that sure and that obsessed in becoming who I wanted to become and building the business that I wanted to build. There was just no plan B. It was either that or it was that. And when you find yourself in that situation, you have a really strong underlying motivator, and you have no plan B, because you would just give everything. You would die for the outcome. You're a pretty formidable force in the world. And then what tends to happen at some point along that journey, whether it's in 1 year or 5 years or 7 years, is you will bend the world. You'll bend the world out of your way. When a force in the world, whether it's yourself or something else, has that much perseverance and that much dedication and that much obsession and that much sort of momentum, the world will eventually move out your way. And that's typically when success happens. You just don't know when it's going to happen. So, and it's funny because whenever I speak to my friends when they're starting businesses, they always ask me for advice, especially when they're first-time entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of things that I could say, but the thing that I always tell them is that at some point it's going to get so unbelievably difficult that you're probably going to want to give up. And you should give up at that point. Any sane person at that point should give up. With the facts you'll have at hand, with the situation that stands before you, you should give up, because the material circumstances of your situation will be you've maybe run out of money, no one believes in your idea, you might have just lost your business partner, and you've got rent to pay, your bailiffs at your door. At that situation, any sane person would give up. So just so you know, that is going to happen to you. You're going to have that moment. And also, just so you know, the reason why you'll either give up in that moment or persevere will be purely based on the reason why you're doing this in the first place. If it's a shallow, sort of surface level, superficial reason, then you'll give up. But if it's not, if you're so deeply obsessed and determined to bring about the change you want to see in the world or to become a success yourself, then you'll find a way to persevere. And that's the advice I give every single time. I give it to my girlfriend, I give it to my best friends. And I do it for a number of reasons. The main reason I actually do it is because I want them to know when that day comes that moment of suffering, that moment of difficulty, isn't evidence of their own personal inadequacy. It's just what happens when you try and do great things. So hopefully in those moments, my words come into their mind, and they think, well, Steve did tell me that this day would come, and he also told me how to get through this day. And that perseverance tends to be successful failure for entrepreneurs. And I've seen it, I sit there on my podcast speaking to the world's greatest athletes and business people and people from other fields, and you can pinpoint the moment when they should have given up. But for whatever reason, typically because they were just so deeply intrinsically motivated and obsessed with bringing about change in the world, they didn't. And often, sometimes because they didn't have a plan B, and often because they just had tremendous self-belief, which stems from evidence they'd acquired through action. But yeah.
So if somebody's watching this now, embarking on their own never give up journey, their own journey through life, that's the advice you'd give to them. It's the fact that it will happen, you will want to give up, but don't have a plan B, and if it means something to you.
My advice would actually be, don't set about achieving anything that you don't deeply, intrinsically want to accomplish. So, because then you won't have the problem, because then you will be able to gracefully overcome that first, that second, that third, that fifth hurdle. So don't even bother endeavoring on or trying to achieve anything where you don't deeply believe and need that accomplishment to be realized. I really feel bad for people that never really wanted to do something anyway. They kind of wanted to do it maybe just for money or for clout or for, some kind of other sort of surface level recognition. I feel sorry for those people when they get into hard times, because it is agony. It's the worst type of agony. Trying to overcome a difficult hurdle when you don't really want to anyway. That's when you see burnout and stress and pain and various other types of mental suffering.
So we've seen your work on Dragon's Den, talking about other people and other people's journeys and things. There's every argument to say you have very much made it. You're a self-made millionaire. There's no reason why you can't buy the 50-foot yacht, sail off into the sunset, and not care about anybody else or anyone, any other thing going forward. You haven't done that. You've completely bucked that stereotype, and we see your work on Dragon's Den and other initiatives. How important is it to you that you continue to give other people opportunities in life? So, I mean, such a diverse range of people and the investments that you're doing. How important is that to you?
So I think on the yacht analogy, there's no evidence that yachts are anything to do with happiness. And I mean, why would they be? If we go back to the point about being human, yachts didn't exist when humans were crafted some thousands of years ago. That's just these sort of material possessions are actually more social status and ego and insecurity than they are anything to do with happiness at all. But what did exist 10,000 years ago was the reason why you and me are both here is because somewhere in our DNA, somewhere in our genetic code, we were given this little thing, this little message that said, you will struggle forward. And that struggling forward that meant that we built empires, and we built great things in cities, and we built planes and trains and all of the things you see around us and these wonderful watches. All of this was a consequence of that little message in our genetic code that says you will struggle forward like your ancestors did. And that's why all of us here still today, we all struggle forward. We could all probably just chill. We live in a society that would take care of us, but we choose and we volunteer for the right type of meaningful struggle because that's what makes us happy. It's what makes all my podcast guests happy. I've sat there with Eddie Hearn and I said, Eddie Hearn, you could sell the business now for maybe $1 billion and go and do the margarita on the beach. And he would never do that because ultimately fulfillment isn't derived from as everybody knows, a lot of people know, isn't derived from the material rewards or the yacht or the money. It's actually derived from the struggling forward towards a meaningful goal, which means that in order to be happy, you have to basically make your life this struggle forward towards a worthwhile goal, ideally surrounded by people you love that are providing you with those meaningful connections. But you should struggle forward forever. And people do that anyway, but just in different ways. So when people retire, they still take up hobbies and they still have things that are mentally challenging, whether it's a crossword or whether it's playing bowls or whether it's something else, they still seek out that struggle. And so if you want to be happy for the rest of your life, you want to fill your entire life with meaningful, worthwhile struggle with people you love. And then you'll never really need to retire. You'll never want to go on a yacht and chill out or drink margaritas on a beach. That will actually probably result in unhappiness because you won't have that challenge. So, yeah.
Talk about struggling and pushing forward. You've struggled and pushed forward and achieved an awful lot in quite a short space of time. And we often hear people saying, well, there's not enough hours in a day and I just don't have enough time and time will tell. But I'm really keen to find out your relationship with time. I mean, obviously we've got the watch there on your wrist. I'm really keen to know what, throughout the entire time you've been here and achieved what you've achieved, what's that relationship been like? Have you ever felt like you haven't had enough time? When you've been looking at a watch on your wrist, what are the sort of things that are going through your mind?
I think I feel like I don't have enough time every day. But, I mean, that's also what makes time such a special thing, and it's actually also what makes anything special. It's what makes life so special is the fact that everything is finite and every decision we make comes at the consequence of something else we could have done. It's the same with, I always talk about, even going to the gym, or having the thing that makes having a six-pack, for example, something people want is purely the story that you were able to not choose waffles and you were able to spend your time, in a disciplined way. That's why we admire it. The reason why a relationship is so special is because it comes at the consequence of all the other options you could have had, and it's the same with my time. The reason why my time is so special is because it's finite. I use the analogy all the time of chips. I get these 24 chips in a day. By the time I've woken up, I've spent 8 of them on sleep. So I've got 16 left to play with. And how I put those chips down and how I place them on the roulette table of life determines my outcomes. I might put 1 on walking my dog and 2 chips on hanging out with my family and my friends. And then the roulette wheel spins and shows me the return that I get on the placement of those chips. Really, when you think about it, the only currency any of us have is our time. It's the only thing we're able to deploy to determine our outcomes. It's the single center point of our influence. There is nothing else that I have. I don't have anything else. I was, and you think about my journey, a kid in Moss Side in Manchester, dropped out, parents aren't speaking to me, bailiff letters, 2 CCJs, the worst credit you've ever seen in the world. The way that I see it is the way that I used my time, the way that I allocated my time, whether it was sending emails to this person, begging this person to give me a meeting, whatever, ultimately is the reason I'm sat here today. And so when you realize that the only thing that your currency in life is your time, you'll then hopefully, and you also realize it's finite, probably in the average human life, I think you get 500,000 chips roughly, you become really conscious about placing those chips, using your time in line with your values and not squandering it away on pettiness or having an argument on Twitter with like someone with an egg emoji for a profile picture or getting caught up in what someone might think of your decisions in your life. These are all ineffective and wasteful uses of your currency. It's the only currency you can also pretty much never buy. Like you can never buy more of it. And it's also the one where you don't actually ever see how many chips you had left. I genuinely might have 1,000 hours left in my life. I could have 100,000, I could have 500,000. But either way, the point is that it is scarce, it is finite, and it's the most important thing. So you've got to really allocate your time in line with your most sincere values in life.
I love that analogy of only having a certain amount of chips, only having 24 chips a day to spend. I think a lot of people watching I've never heard that before, and it really is a really good way to sort of reframe your mind in how you actually allocate your time during the day. With that in mind, what does a timepiece represent to you? So if you're wearing a watch, I take it you're an avid watch wearer, what does a time, does it have to represent something to you when you're looking at it? Has it got to have some emotional meaning to you?
I mean, so I'm someone that if I don't have a very disciplined relationship with time, then I can get in I can cause a lot of issues. My life has to run to the minute because of the nature of my work. I'm the co-founder now of maybe 5 or 6 businesses that are active, that are making more than 8 figures in revenue, that have all been started within the last 24 months. So I have lots of responsibilities, and the allocation of those 24 chips, those 24 hours I get in a day, is so critical to me because of that, because I know that that's the center point of my influence. So my relationship with watches has always been first and foremost to help me to make more efficient use of this finite currency that I have, that I deploy every day called my time. The second order effect is like, I still care about it looking beautiful. And I still care about it somewhat representing like who I think I am and my personality. And so when I look at this particular watch, as you can probably tell from my outfit, there's so many different hints that I garner from it. The first is that it feels authentic in many ways. And I say that in part because I can almost see the construction of this item. I can see inside it, I can see the screws that have been built into this, and there's something about that rawness of both the material but also the design that makes me resonate with it. There's something about the authenticity of it, that it's not like, it would have been quite easy to make the decision to hide the screws on this piece, but that's what speaks to me. It's like that rawness and also the appreciation of the mechanics. And then I think generally these are just really stylish pieces. I'm someone that listens to a certain type of music. I like hip hop music, I like R&B music, I like street music, and I don't know why, but I get a lot of those like flavors from this. Whether that's because of people that have worn it before or whether it's the design, I don't know, but it resonates with me as a person. And then so in terms of my relationship with a watch, it's funny because I actually have sand timers all over my house, and I have them again because it's a reminder. It's the only way that I think you can truly visualize that you have that time is finite. When having a sand timer on the shelf behind me while I'm recording my podcast or in my office, and just turning it over is this reminder to get on with my life. To live more in line with my values and to stop wasting time on things that are petty. And I was thinking about it last night in the gym as well. I was thinking about the chip analogy, and I was thinking about how even I sometimes need to be reminded of the importance and the value of my time. And especially I'd say my life has changed a lot in the last year. the amount of demands on my time have increased more so than at any point in my life. And so I've tried to become really militant about my life running to I've tried to become really militant about the use of my time. Yeah.
Well, the watch you're wearing there, the 2100, that's very much the result of an awful lot of perseverance and evolving on our side. The 2100 itself started out as a standard resin timepiece, which was brought out 2 years ago. And over time, all we've tried to do is to try and evolve this and see how far we can push it and bring it forward into the full metal timepiece that you see today. We have literally looked at every single aspect of it to make it entirely shock resistant and very much make it into a watch built for life. What does G-Shock represent to you as a brand? I mean, you mentioned there it's something that you've seen in the past on the wrists of some of your role models and people that you admire. What does it mean to you as a brand?
I think the biggest thing, for me, it's a few things. The first is obviously like reliability because of the durability of this particular piece. And, I've heard the story about the origin story of G-Shock and where it came from. So that makes a lot of sense. This is a watch that you can really rely on in terms of that durability, especially if you're living a bit more of an active life and you are someone that's susceptible like I am to honestly breaking everything that I own. I think if you ask any of my friends or anyone that knows me well, I have a remarkable ability to smash everything that I own. I'll smash my phone maybe 10 times a year. In the gym, I drop the weight on it, or and that's a consequence of living a really active life. The second thing is I find it to be really fashionable, and I almost couldn't tell you why. But I think a lot of the time fashion is in story. So there's a story that surrounds the brand of G-Shock that a lot of people can resonate for a lot of reasons. And I think it comes back to what you were saying about the values of the brand. Whenever you get in bed with a brand as a consumer, as a customer, what you're actually saying is, I can see myself, or I want to align myself with those values, and those values of persistence, of reliability, of accuracy, of perseverance, of never giving up, all come through with the G-Shock brand. And it's funny because so often when I put a watch on my wrist, I'm scared. I'm scared that I'm going to break it. I have particularly large hands, so getting anything onto my wrist is a very nervous process. So when I put this on, in the way that it's kind of clasped my wrist, it feels as solid as it feels like I'm now part of it. It's a weird feeling because the materials used are so high quality, I guess, that I have assurance that this won't break, even if no matter what life sort of brings at me. I feel like this is gonna be there with me regardless. So,
it definitely won't break. We can tell you that. It'd be really good to see. You're more than welcome to try. I mean, you were talking there about reliability. We take great pride at G-Shock we care an awful lot about the environment. We know that you have your own standpoint and taking responsibility for your impact on the environment. How important is it to you as a consumer, but also as an investor, in investing and purchasing items which are built to last and are built to a high standard?
Yeah, it's become incredibly important to me. Now at the stage I'm at in my life, what I'm looking for is reliable pieces that will last me a long time that I can literally wear every day, and not have to worry about too much in terms of, is it going to fit with this outfit, or is it going to break someday? Am I going to have to go and buy another one? Am I going to have to be conscious and scared all the time that it might get a scratch or a dent, or that it will have to go into repair? So typically, when you look at what I wear, when I'm in the office and when I go to the gym, it's the same outfit. It's this all black outfit called 24/7, and you can't rip it, you can't tear it, and you can't stain it. And I will wear that pretty much all day, every day. So, and this is a more recent thing in my life, and it actually goes back to the point that I made earlier about the importance of time. I don't want to spend time having things repaired, having them break. I don't want to spend time doing any shopping at all if I don't have to, or even having to think about or be concerned about something breaking, scratching, or needing repairs. So I think my outfit and my taste now, and whether it's my suitcases or whether it's my fashion choice or what I wear in the gym, it's all centered around those principles again of time and reliability and keeping up with the life that I live, which is a very active, fast-paced, 24/7 life. And that's what G-Shock does as well. It's right. It's very much in line with those values. So
We really appreciate it. We're pleased to have you on board. I mean, you were talking there briefly about the time and what you've done in the past there. I'm really keen to know, as we reach towards the finish now, if you could whisper something to your 12, 15-year-old self, what would it have been?
if I could speak to my 12, 15-year-old self, I would just try and give him even more certainty and belief that his hypothesis on the world was right. Because even I was riddled with doubt, and I think everybody is somewhat riddled with doubt. I reflect on some of the notes that I wrote back then, and there were moments where I was clearly doubting myself to some degree. And doubt ends up it causes procrastination, it slows you down, and it can get in the worst case scenario, it can get in the way of you ever endeavoring to do something great or to pursue yourself, pursue your dreams. So I would have just loved to whisper in his ear that you're right, go for it. These stories you're being told about the future and grades and the importance of them, and that if you don't get an A grade or if you got kicked out of school, you'll be a failure in your life. These are all false. And the most important thing ultimately is that you pursue yourself, you pursue your ambitions, and you go and accumulate as much evidence as you can about who you are and your capabilities. If you do that, you'll be fine and the outcome will be great. And it's funny because people are often surprised to hear that even I would go back and try and whisper self-belief into a former version of myself's ear. But I think I would have got to where I am today sooner. That would have saved me time. And it would have meant that I would have had more time left to live life and to do all the wonderful things that I want to do in my future. So, yeah, I would have just tried to remove doubt. Fake doubt.
I've noticed in your podcast, Diary of a CEO, you always ask somebody towards the end of the interview, you ask them to write a question for the next guest. We haven't got another guest coming on. But I think a lot of people watching this would be interested to know what question, if you were being into, which you are now, what would be your question?
I would ask, it's a question I've thought of recently. I'd say, if happiness were a recipe and it was formed by several ingredients that are required to be in certain measurements, what is missing from your recipe? What ingredients are you missing in order to be happy? Yeah.
It's a really good question.
Everyone's missing something. And even if they're not missing something, they might not have the right measurement or the right balance of a certain ingredient. You know, you need 2 eggs, they might have 1 egg. So I'd ask them that question. And I've asked that question a few times now, just to some of my guests more recently in the last week, and they all answer it. So they all acknowledge the fact that there is something probably missing, that the balance of their own happiness recipe is somewhat out of kilter. And it's always fascinating because you can't just ask someone a question like, you can't ask them what's missing from your life. It's a bit of a strange way to frame it, but to say first that, if happiness were a recipe and it was made up of different ingredients and different measurements, what ingredient are you missing? Is a little bit easier to understand as an analogy. So,
and finally, we've been asked to ask this: if our roles were reversed, what question would you ask?
I'd ask you that question.
Oh, excellent.
What's the answer?
I don't know. As you say, it's a very hard question to answer.
People answer it fine when they're in my kitchen and there's no one else there, but
that's the thing,
in front of 15 people, it's a little bit difficult.
I suppose it is. But yeah, I'd probably have to try and have a think about it. I'm quite happy with I'm very lucky to work with something I'm passionate about.
You'll be the first person ever to not answer.
I think if there was something I probably needed to have more of, it would be time outside. And I think as careers move on and you get busier and busier, the things that you have a secondary love for, so being outdoors and mountains and things and exploring, that's something that gets affected. So I'd probably, to be completely happy, I'd probably want to do a bit more of that and adjust that recipe for me right now. So that would be my answer to that.
Good answer.
Steven, you've been an absolute pleasure. We're very aware you're a busy man. You've achieved so much in such a short space of time. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us and representing our brand. So thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful watch. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, buddy. Thanks.